Welcome to Fontribute, where we talk about fonts and their attributes. Fontribute. I'm Thomas Jockin.
And I'm Erin McLaughlin.
Well, hey, Erin, great to see you again.
Hello, hello. Thanks for
Awesome.
having me on again.
Yeah. So, what are we talking about today?
Let's check out the slide. Today we are going to compare two different Agate typefaces, which are typefaces designed for very small printing sizes. So let's say 4, 5, 6-point type, something really tiny. And we have Lipa High, which was released by TypeTogether, and Trench Sans, which was released by Indian Type Foundry, or ITF.
Awesome. That's great. So, do you want to just jump in and see what we got to explore?
Yeah, let's see what the differences are. Cool.
All right. First one is N.
Cool. So something you're going to see with these agate typefaces for small sizes is that generally we're going to have a really high X height because they want the designer wants to make the kind of counter form as large as possible so that you can kind of see it more easily at a small size. So automatically, it's kind of interesting to notice these bounding boxes. Like this is a very high kind of X height going on in Trench Sans. Lipa is also, quite high as well. And also notice, you'll see this later on, but just take a peek down here. This is going to give you a preview of the space we're working with descenders. So that's kind of the first thing that I find interesting about the dimensions of the typeface in general. Do you want to talk about some of the design decisions and the curves?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think most present I see is how this joint treatment is handled by both designs. Both employ strategies that try to solve this basically blobbing up of space. Agate typefaces, agate typefaces generally have to deal with the constant issue of stuff blotting in, basically to filling in joints or other basic joining of two strokes or two parts of a letter together. So one strategy is maximizing counter size. The other one is dealing with these joints or interactions of parts to other parts. So in Lipa, we see the start of a break transition right here in the stem, right, moving here to here, to kind of basically limit versus being a full unit that size, right? The designer is trying to remove as much black, as possible from that area. I noticed that angle stroke energy over here, basically making it a smaller unit, so not to fill in that space. Meanwhile, with Trench, it's an opposite solution, which is kind of cutting in. It's kind of an ink trap solution in this joint over here on the stem to the shoulder transition between the two of those. Erin, you want to talk about the curve transition between the two and how those are approached differently?
Yeah, that was a great way of explaining it. Now, because Thomas was pointing out that this kind of curve starts way back inward, inside the stroke, the vertical stroke we have here, it kind of gives it more time for the curve to be a bit rounder here in Trench Sans. It goes up a little bit further and then into a more traditional kind of, not traditional, what am I saying? A more full round sort of curve. But here in Lipa, because of that strategy he was talking about, where the join happens like, further inward, further to the left here, and a little bit higher up, check kind of like how high this happens. It's way up here where the stroke starts. So it's a bit flatter on the top here. And also in the counter form. So that's going to be interesting to see these two different strategies at small sizes, even though these curves are quite different, like I said, very round versus very flat. Because this is going to be seen at a really small point size, it's going to be neat to see whether or not they look dramatically different in their curves at the intended use size. So we'll check that out later, but very cool.
Excellent. O.
Yay. So we usually compare N and O as our first two characters that we look at when we look at typefaces. And typically, for a sans serif design without a lot of contrast, the O's are usually quite similar, I would say. And here, I mean, they're at a glance, they look quite similar. I would say that Lipa has a bit less well, it's a little darker and it looks like it might have a little bit less contrast if you compare this to that. That's what I'm talking about, that the difference is a little bit less than maybe this versus this. Would you agree?
I would agree with that. Also, take notice how these curve profiles are handled. They're more square in Trench versus Lipa. Again, so these are kind of particular nuance points that initially in your review you would think they're the same, but a little closer look you can see the curve profiles are slightly different between each other and the contrast between the two. I'd agree with both those assessments.
Nice. Yeah, and this is also one of our previous talks that we did. We compared some monospace screen fonts by DJR, and it was kind of interesting to note that there were similar strategies in terms of making kind of a very rectangular O that takes up a lot of space to kind of give the counter as much space as possible. So in some ways, the design decisions are going to be kind of similar to a screen font for the same purpose for small text. Kind of interesting.
Excellent.
Yay. Woo.
D
Yay.
time.
D time. So here we're combining kind of the round shape and a straight stroke here. And wow, we've got some interesting differences. Like Thomas noted on the N, we have that sort of ink trap cut in effect here on Trench versus the kind of blended, but the main vertical stroke is kind of bending backward to make more room for this white space here. So that's pretty interesting. And then similarly up here, we've got like kind of the stroke bending backward again here in Lipa while maintaining a more flat curve profile. I'm stealing all of the points for this. I apologize, but
Go. Enjoy it.
We'll keep going in. So actually, this is kind of similar here. That's kind of interesting to me. They look very similar in this little junction, although this cut angle is a little bit different. But this is a fun added bonus. We've got an angled shear up at the top here that goes slightly above the bounding box, which is, I don't know, depending on your thoughts on how strict you need to be with these. This is either good or bad or whatever, but it'll show up. Who cares? But just something interesting to note. But that this ends up being a little bit higher, and that's gives it a little bit extra flair. I wonder if it's going to do anything when we see it in context. I don't know.
Yes.
Woo! So I probably talked about everything here.
Not everything.
Anything else to add? Tell me.
Another point. Just take notice too in the strategy. Notice the straight segment strategy versus this kind of rounded strategy, right, between the two.
Yeah, you're right.
Right. So just take notice like that. I think probably, I'm curious to see the results. What happens when you choose to approach straight segments versus round segments for these kind of ink trap directions, right? But notice this wasn't done all the time. For example, this one is a straight segment transition, much like over here.
Right. And actually, this is just me noticing this right now. So, we talked about in the end that the curve on Trench Sans was a much rounder, but it's interesting to me that the top part of the D is a lot flatter in Trench than in Lipa. This one actually looks more round. So that was kind of an interesting thing to notice. Let's see if maybe we'll see if that sort of disparity exists elsewhere in the typefaces. I don't know.
Let's continue.
Woo, cool. Yay. So I added this. I thought usually we don't skip to P next, but I just thought what a great demonstration of how short the descender space is. Like that is such a ridiculously small space, but because of the required use for really small sizes, you probably only need a tiny little nib down at the bottom to show that this is a P. And so that's why this decision was made. They really maximized this internal space where most of the characters exist in this area. Only very few characters have descenders, so you can get away with having a less descriptive descender. So do you want to talk any more about these?
Yeah, obviously, yeah. It's like cute. It's like a teeny tiny little descender, right? It's adorable. That's quite enjoyable. Right, but Lipa also continues this process, just not as aggressively, right, between the two. Yeah. But you can see it there too. I think also, I think a big when I teach type design or mentor in it, I think a big thing to talk about is the grammar of your components, of how things come together. And notice this between the D and the P. I'm actually glad you showed the P and the D, right? Because notice the relationship, as we were discussing before, of how this curve profile is much steep, like kind of much arched position versus a more flat approach on the bottom, right? Yep. So notice notice what's happened though. There's a kind of rotational symmetry.
Yeah.
Right. So that's So I think people would assume like is like. They just follow a copy paste from each other directly, maybe even mirror it horizontally. Like basically, you take it from this direction, you mirror it this way, right? When actually type design, there's more of a rotation that happens. It's like 180 degrees. So it goes from there to here. I'm using imagine a graph rotating through the shape. Anyways, that might be a little opaque to talk about that, but I just want to point out that some of the similarities you saw in the D got applied in the P, but not in a way you would normally expect. There's a rotational symmetry versus a mirrored symmetry. And by the way, that is applying to with Lipa as well.
Very cool.
Okay.
Excellent. Yay.
G time.
Oh yeah. So no, you should go ahead. I've been yakking all morning. Yeah.
Yeah, so again, so we see that the program of a shallower top curve transition, right, on this segment results in different design decisions being made, right? So in this one, because it's shallower, it made more sense just to compress the stroke, the stem with the joint together into this form over here. We see on the right corner of this G versus this more steeper part transition in Lipa allows for this continuation of the program of the stem terminal coming through in the G. So that's probably the first thing I see across these two. What else do you see?
You didn't see it. Did you see it? Oh, there's a really cool surprise in here. I included this because check out the baseline. They both had the same baseline up until now, but check it out. In the G, whoops, well now I'm curving my stroke. In the G in Trench Sans, they moved it up. I've seen this a few times in other typefaces of similar use. In order to get more space down here, they moved the bottom of the G up so it's not touching the baseline. Woo, cool trick.
So proud of you. I love that. Excellent.
Yes. So anyway, I just really wanted to include the G because I thought that was pretty fascinating. I see that every once in a while. Oh, you know where gosh, if anyone's familiar with did you review the Ono Typeco Hobo?
A hobo revival.
Yeah.
Hobo yes, revival. I did a way time ago. Yes.
Yeah. But anyway, so in that typeface, I think there are no descenders, right?
That's correct.
You had to kind of like push everything up to fit on the baselines. You see some similar things going on in that typeface, which is kind of cool if people are interested. Anyway, diversion, but yeah, so I thought that was kind of a cool solution in Trench Sans in order to give the G a full happy profile. Otherwise, if they had kept that same, like we saw, the P was only a tiny little descender nub. I don't know how you would have made that happen with the G. It would have been really hard. So this was the logical solution. So yeah, pretty cool.
Yeah. Also, we can see some other things too, right? Basically, notice, remember the discussion about curve ink trap solutions? Notice this one. It feels more natural to have this kind of curve transition, right? Yep. In the part of the G. Just contrast that to this solution over here between the two. Also, what you can see, notice the stem unit width is adjusted.
Yeah.
Right? Because basically in complex forms in Agate typefaces, they have to compensate for complex shapes where all these components come together. So as a result, to create the kind of a theme I like to teach in type design is to make things appear equal, you have to make them different. So in this case, you wouldn't continue this inconsistent stroke weight on this area of the stem zone area, kind of moving into a terminal compared to up here, right? And that program is applied down here as well.
Nice. Very cool. Yeah, that is quite thin down here. Very cool how they managed to adjust the weight properly. Cool. So what's our next letter? I can't remember. A.
A time.
Woohoo! A is always a very expressive, differentiating, interesting letter, huh? So in Lipa High, by the way, this is also possibly of note, of interest. There's another version of Lipa which has a lower X height, but this one's higher. And I don't remember how low the other version of it is, maybe about that high. I don't quite remember. But I picked these two because they had similar X heights, and I wanted to compare these two typefaces. But check out, this is crazy, how the difference between the bowl approach. This is one of the letters where they do look quite a lot different, I would say, in terms of the approach of how they distribute the weight and not the weight, the white space. You know what? You're good at this. You talk about it. Tell me more. You love A's.
I do love A's, yes. So yeah, also we can talk about the bold treatment, right? Notice with the proportion of white space, as Erin pointed out, right? Compare these zones to these zones, right? It seems like in Trench the solution just equality. We want these to be roughly equal to each other, while, whoops, in Lipa, the priority is this is the primary zone, this is secondary, right? Let's maximize the space. So it's interesting. So actually, I am very surprised by Trench's solution. I'm curious how this is going to work in text, considering how aggressive they are with everything else with their maximizing counter sizes. So that's probably the first thing I'm seeing across both. And again, likewise, I think I love these kind of projects, these Agate typeface approaches, because if you look at how many curve transitions are happening in this A, it's amazing in the stem. Like, just take notice of this interaction right here, right? Notice the curve coming in and out. This one from the joint coming into it, and then this area down here, right? All those parts, such a complex level of design happening, and that really aggressive pinching that's occurring, way more so than what we're seeing in the Lipa approach. So perhaps that was part of the solution, because they wanted to make this a little smaller. They chose to really amplify the ink trap solutions in that zone over there.
Yeah, it's very interesting to me also to see. Here's another difference between the two. I mean, they both kind of have a slightly flatter curve up top here, but it's interesting to me to see, how far over does this, top part of the A, how far does it reach compared to the bowl beneath? So that's another kind of interesting comparison. And knowing that, gosh, I'm really surprised. Like you said, I don't know, this shape feels to me like, looks kind of like a little sausage or something. I don't know what it
A
is.
sausage link.
It's yeah. There's something weird about it, or a little lumpy about it, that I'm not as like. There's so many other cool parts of this typeface. I just find the A to be a little like, it doesn't seem right to me. Maybe I just need to see it at the small size, but it seems like the weight distribution is it's all a little bit I don't know, indecisive or something. There's something weird about that Trench A. I don't know. Wow, that was helpful for everyone at home. No,
Well, let's clarify what that means. Basically, you compare that to this approach, right?
Yes. Yeah.
You curve for relationships, right? In the bowl of the A in Lipa. Yeah, I would agree with you. There's a lack of decision in terms of, okay, what is the priority? Is it the stem? Is it this like transition zone? Is it the vertical, or is it down here? I would agree with you on that. Now we need to see it in text to make any assessment on how successful or not. But as an abstract form by itself, I do sense a little hesitation on which is the priority, which one is not.
Yeah, interesting. I'll remember to look at it when we're checking out the later slide. Cool.
Awesome.
Yay.
Yay, Case.
Go ahead. Want to talk about it?
Sure. I mean, basically, well, I kind of love that. That is amazing. That radical cutted. So we've seen cases like this, right, where it's just a stem and then the angle strokes don't connect, right? We've seen that move before, so that's not new. But what I find rather entertainingly awesome is, instead of being perfectly straight, they decided to introduce an ink trap effect or taper right here. That is immensely entertaining. Right, it's a solution that you could feel in similar energy with the Lipa approach, but at least they connected and just radically cut the contrast at that crossbar effect area to resolve that, basically the blobbing up of space. Likewise, our solutions, notice again the use of angle strokes versus a nice smooth transition. Right, notice those differences between the two letters so far. And again, the angled terminal and the ascender, as Erin pointed out before.
Perfect. Very cool.
Did that steal everything from you?
I think that's everything about the K. That is good. I think we have maybe one more letter we're going to look at up close. I think.
I'll give it to you. So, you're at angle W. So, jump on. What do you want to talk about?
This, yeah, I wanted to include the W because I thought this was probably the very best example of showing just how deep those trenches of Trench Sans actually are. Like, wow, they really, they dig so much deeper than the Lipa High. So we're able to have a slightly wider W. And I have a feeling in text, it's going to seem a lot clearer because there's going to be a lot more definition it's going to be a little bit muddier. You know, when we were talking about ink traps, in case people don't know what that means, you know, we're just talking about, Thomas said earlier, kind of those dark spots. So like literally typefaces like this were designed for print specifically, in which if you're printing ink gets absorbed by the fibers of paper, and then it kind of just little tiny areas like this, you know, there's going to be like a little bit of fill in when the ink expands and kind of you know, plumps up into those fibers. So that's why these sort of cuts existed. But now they're kind of almost a stylistic thing, because I'm sure these typefaces will also be used on the web, or maybe in large sizes even. So now it's just become kind of a cool stylistic thing as well. Yeah, wow, they really look quite different. And this is kind of strange in Lipa. I don't know if my eyes are just bonkers, but look at the width of this stroke. This, you know, these are both kind of heavy, but this one's so really thin, and this one's like a lot thicker than that. So I just find this kind of, seems like this right half of the W is a lot heavier or something. It's really weird. I'm not quite sure what's going on there, but am I bonkers?
No, I see it.
I don't know.
I see what you're talking about.
So, I don't know. But anyway, just something interesting to note. There must have been a struggle in terms of like, how do I get this to look natural and distribute the weight and not look too heavy? And I don't know. I don't know if up close it looks kind of funny, but we'll see it in context, I think. But anyway, blah. I don't know. So anything else you want to add, or should we check out the next portion? I don't know what's next.
More or less, just take notice of kind of how the program of the design follows through, right? Basically, all the straight angle transitions, right, in this quadrant, and this one, right, versus the curved transitions. You know, I'm kind of curious how this is going to affect their effectiveness, or the impressions you get from in use, right? Does curved transitions have an effect that's different from the straight angle transitions and these ink trap effects, besides the points that Erin has shared so far? So that's my main question for myself as we move forward.
Very cool. Yay! All right. So this slide, you know, we usually like to include a comparison here to show you the relative, like the cap height and the ascender height, kind of all these different heights together. So we'll just mark them for you in case you don't know what I'm talking about. So, yeah, Thomas will do the other one. Yay! All right.
Yeah, there you go.
So
Teamwork.
as we were saying, the X height of these sorts of typefaces is they're quite high. The difference here is, I would say that in Lipa, the cap height is actually a bit shorter than in Trench Sans, as you can see here, this difference. So that might be kind of interesting, taking a look when we look at this in context. Anything else you want to add about?
Well, the biggest thing to see, take notice of where notice the crossbar setup to the X height. Like, these are so comically gigantic that it breaks general, or air quotes, proper transition of proportion for typefaces in Latin script. These are like dramatically higher up. It's crazy. It's kind of awesome. Right. So we knew that before because of how eeny bitty tiny these ascenders were. Right. We can also even see how that's a very dramatic interplay with the cap to the lowercase. And likewise, we can see this really strong ink trap solution to the point where, again, we have this sausage link effect, right, in the crossbar of Trench Sans's H versus the more kind of octagonal shape in Lipa.
Fun. Very cool.
Yeah, and just know again, with the solutions we saw in earlier designs got applied to other designs going forward.
Nice arrows. Beautiful.
Thank you.
Cool.
All right, so now we got typeset out into a line.
Yeah, this kind of helps. I like this view because we always get to see like how are things translated across the board. You know, relationships to other characters. So this was fun because we also got to include what does the T look like, which I almost included in the snapshot, like checking that out. I love this really wacky stuff happening in the Trench Sans. That's pretty funny. And also check out the tittle on the eye on Lipa High. It's actually quite big. It kind of overlaps the width of the eye, which you don't see that commonly. But I think the designer must have thought it's important to see this so it doesn't, you know, let's make it a little bit larger so that folks don't get it confused with something else. You know, maybe that makes it look a little different than an L. I'm not sure. We can't compare with the L. Also to note, while we're here, now you can see what I was talking about with that, with that baseline with the G, how it moves up slightly. It's a little bit higher than you would expect. Also, while you were talking about the K, I was kind of multitasking. I went and checked out, I forgot, Trench Sans. This is a sans serif version of a slab serif design. And I had this hunch. So in the A, in the slab serif, there was actually like a little thingy that went down there. And so I'm thinking that's probably why the A looks a little strange to me, is because they, in the slab, the designer like had something happening there in that open space. And in my opinion, that maybe looks like they should have raised this slightly to compensate, but who knows? Anyway, just wanted to note that. Check out the slab version as well if you have time. Blah, blah. Okay, Erin's done talking. What do you want to say?
I mean, we covered most of the points. I think a couple of things we can just see from the other designs. Kind of, it's interesting. It's almost like you can notice by the nature of the ink trapping effect. It's like they're almost like I could see them very visibly at this size, right? In Trench, I notice the H. I see in the M, right? They're there in Lipa as well, but they're not as pronounced, right? Just they're not as at this size, not so pronounced.
Yeah.
And as you pointed out in the T, you know, you see the effect, but this one, it's like literally someone cut it in, like with an like slashed in. It reminds me a lot of the this popular method of really bold typefaces, where they get so bold the thins are like these thin tapers. To give an example, right? Say here's a curve, right? The curve is literally like this. I don't know, something like, I'm not drawing it very well, but I'm just interested to know how the ink traps at this level are feeling very different in Trench than in Lipa already, because of the deepness of the cuts and the amount of white being imposed into it. But it's not the intended size, so we need to see how this is going to look.
Sure. But yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, at this size, like to me, the Lipa does look more like a what you would say traditional or regular sort of typeface, whereas Trench, you definitely know something weird is going on because it looks totally, those cuts look really out of place. So let's check out our next slide. What else? Oh, one more thing. Yes, in detail. I thought before we check out context, I put in this slide that shows some of the other extra characters that you will encounter in normal text, but wowie zowie. The first thing that jumps out to me is the enormous, absolutely enormous comma and quote marks in Lipa. They are very fat, they are very large, and they're angled in such a way they really draw my attention. My God. And which is funny because in comparison, I would say the question mark just is completely dwarfed. It looks so narrow and tiny. It's very funny. What are your I should let you talk for a little bit.
No, it's all good. I mean, like you said, I'm just, if we compare these two systems, right? Like compare this to this. I mean, yeah, this is gigantically beefy, much heavier, right? And even the drawing design, right? The choice of doing this kind of slash approach versus the curve approach, or the model of that, it really stands out as an approach. I'm curious how these are going to hold up with this thin stroke to the heavy stroke relationship. So that's the first thing I'm seeing. I'm going, woof, that's interesting. And considering, I'm not sure if you added slides in this round for the accent characters, but I feel like these designs are maybe sometimes either too enclosing or too small in relationship, or yet not wide enough or pronounced enough. While I feel like Lipa's is they seem really pronounced. I think it would do pretty well in reading. I'm not sure if you have text settings from this, so we can confirm this.
Unfortunately, I think I only have one accented character in the text slide. Sorry, everybody. But I would say that, based on what we know about the intended use of this, since it's going to be so small, I would think, yes, you would want larger accented characters than typical. And even these, like comparing the size of this looks like a normal size tilde to me versus like how big this is. It's just like pretty funny. I would have expected them to go even a little bigger if that's their approach to accents on Lipa, but who knows? Then again, we've had kind of some interesting comments kind of after one of our previous presentations, some talking back and forth, and with also I watched the DJR again, his talk at A Type High that's online. Sorry, I'm going on a tangent here, but talking about the approach to accent design, like just how understated do you make these things, or how wacky do you go, and all that sort of stuff. It's interesting to think about and talk about. But anyway, we'll have one of these in context, and we'll at least get to see it there. So I don't know. Jump ahead. Not in this slide, unfortunately, the next one, but at least here we've got the quote marks. And yeah, we got quotes and a couple numbers going on in here. And my God, do these quotes and commas stick out enormously to me. It's quite funny. I don't know. I think they might have gone just a slightly overboard with that weight. That's my opinion, but I don't know. At least size, maybe. Well, maybe not. I don't know.
Well, that's the thing. That's I was going to comment. I think it needs to be smaller set to really confirm this, right?
Yeah, you're right. Next slide is smaller. We'll get there.
Yeah, we'll get there.
But this, but on the other hand, this to me seems a little too dainty, too small.
Yeah, too light.
Yeah. And they're quite, those quotes are very close together. I think it would have benefited from a little bit more space in between the two or something. I don't know. There's something about it. Doesn't seem quite right to me. I prefer the Lipa punctuation in this case. Anyway, what are some other observations? Like, I would say Lipa seems a little bit more tightly spaced and a little more narrow in general. Trench seems wider and has more kind of brightness to it. Is that what you see?
Yeah, I see a little bit of that. I mean, yeah, just the overall color is lighter in Trench than Lipa, right? Overall, from a color point of view, the overall impression of the text block itself, I would definitely say that too. Let's try to see the A. Okay, so far it's holding up well. Like, it's not bad.
Yeah.
So we're hanging in there, but again, we know this is still not the right size. I say it because sometimes now the crazy ink traps are mellowing out. I don't see them as bad at this size, which is great. So mission accomplished.
Right. Yeah, I was gonna say, depending on your screen, like on my screen, whatever your resolution is, however big it is, at my screen at this point, I don't see any of those cuts or any of the ink traps basically at all. Maybe just a few spots, like the V, or there might just be a few instances where I see those graphic and the K here a little bit. The K, actually, I do kind of see it's disconnected. That's quite funny at this size. But yeah, I don't. All of those compensations. Well, we've got maybe a little bit in the X and a little in the M, but it's blending quite well. We've got a lot of that natural blending happening. So even though this isn't print, like I was talking about the ink bleeding, still on screen you encounter similar problems with things kind of getting blobby when they're at small sizes. So anyway.
All right, so let's move on to seeing how this works in, like, its proper usage size.
Woo! Yeah.
Bar and the doorbell. Okay.
Yay! So this is a little more similar, hopefully, depending on your screen. This is more similar to the size that this is intended for. So this is really what we're going to want to test at this sort of setting. They both look great to me. I mean, I find them both pretty darn clear to read. Do you want to give some initial reactions?
Yeah, I would agree, and I think we can end the conclusion by saying those quote marks are too aggressive in Lipa. Right, they're too aggressive, but they're actually not that. They're nowhere near as bad as what would expect. How crazy they are, and actually this is more the case actually with the single quote than with the double. I think in the double they removed some weight from the single. If you look over here at O'Donnell, I can't pronounce that, but so that was probably the initial impression I got. But yes, it works. I think it works very well. All the crazy tapers are basically all milled in. I barely can perceive any of them. It's a very, very sound approach. And by the way, for Trench, similar things. But I think we can agree with the conclusion. I agree with Erin's points that double quotes need to be spaced further apart and could probably need more weight added in to sit better on the page with their type. But overall, I think it's a very successful project on both sides. The color looks good, and all those crazy, wacky ink traps are holding up very well overall.
Yeah, and I want to double back to that A. I really do like having that extra space on the A, comparing the A's. So even though I was knocking it earlier, my eyes actually kind of prefer this A design to the one in Lipa. Lipa, maybe it looks a little too bubbly on the bottom, but that's just personal preference. But that's cool how it kind of ended up surprising me at this small intended size. And going back again, like I was mentioning, the coding fonts, those monospace fonts that DJR designed, in some cases, if they were to maybe make all of the punctuation a little darker, let's compare this. What the heck is that called? Help me, Lord. I forgot what that's called. But that little, oh God, that thingy. If that thingy were a little darker, a little more similar, if you made all those marks as dark, this might actually be good for coding purposes and stuff like that. Although maybe they don't use prime. I don't know what that's called. Maybe they don't use that in coding and all. What the heck do I know? But it's cool. It's cool. It might be a good option for people who want to see the punctuation like we described in coding. One other thing I want to mention before we get off of this is numbers. Maybe I should have made a slide for numbers, but it's kind of cool to see how some of these designs, I would say in Trench, check out the 3. The design of the 3 was made with a little bit more angled bottom stroke versus a kind of like a bubbly round. And in these sort of typefaces, that design decision is made because it helps to differentiate it from the 8, because sometimes in small sizes this could close up and look a little bit more like an 8. So if you angle the bottom, anyway, that was a neat design decision. So something that might be worth looking at if anyone's interested in checking out these typefaces further. So anyway, they both work really well. I'm pleasantly surprised. Good job, both designers. Bingo. Excellent. Cool.
All right. So what's our conclusion, Erin? What's your thoughts after this great journey?
Our conclusion is both of those like kind of ink trapping, sort of both of those techniques of thinning out the strokes, they were different, but they both worked well according to our test, which was cool. And obviously we noticed that having a really high X height works very well for this sort of typeface. They were both spaced somewhat similarly. Trench a little bit more loose spacing. I liked that a lot more light coming through. But both of these designs, if you were to try to study how to design a typeface for this purpose, they would both, I think, be very good models to check out. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I have to agree. I mean, things like that crazy P, it works. I mean, that's the thing. I find it rather amazing that it's very successful, and that kind of raised G in Trench as well. Basically, all these strategies seem very unusual, and you would normally not do in air quotes proper typography or type design. Makes sense in its application, right? They all come together, and I think overall very successful results in the end. So I would say great examples both ways of looking at how type can be modified for extreme circumstances and yet still be effective. So it's been a great time learning all this.
Yeah, this was great. Thanks for having me join you again for more type fun. Thanks, Fontribute and viewers.
Yes, thank you all. So hope you all learn a lot from this experience, and I look forward to hearing your comments on YouTube. Hope you all have a great week. Talk to you next time.
Bye.
Bye.